So Thales, for some closing questions that we have, for me, after listening to you, uh, I wanted to ask you, what are some of the books that have inspired you?
Mhm. So I think that the first book I read was from my late colleague Clay Christensen, The Innovator's Dilemma. I think it's a phenomenal book. It shows how big companies die, essentially, how big companies fail to innovate. And it's a brilliant treatise on explaining the mechanics by which big companies die. And it's a very unique book, and it's extremely impacted my life. And I talked to Clay Christensen many times in the process of doing my own research until he died a few years ago. But he left a great legacy. Unfortunately, the book doesn't say how to avoid death. The book tells a lot about how big companies die, but it doesn't tell how to avoid the death. It's just a description of how big companies die. Another book, The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. I think that's a great book, and it talks about a lot about pivoting, experimentation, and getting signals from customers. So The Lean Startup I think it's a great book. Crossing the Chasm, that talks about kind of the early adopters, the late adopters, the laggards, by Roger Moore. I think it's a great book on understanding the difference between customers and their value for innovating. Because as a customer, if you're the early adopter, you're taking risks. And often companies or startups don't realize that. The first few customers to use Uber, essentially you are taking a huge risk. You're going into somebody's car, and this is not a company, and you hope they won't kill you. It's at night. I hope they're not going to kill me. I hope they're not going to just throw because I don't know. I've never heard of Uber. What? It's not a taxi. It's like a person's car. Who's this person? I don't know. Right. So there's risks to doing that. There's risk to renting a house on Airbnb because you arrive there and the house doesn't exist, or it's not their house. You paid somebody. So oftentimes innovators forget that consumers are taking risks for the first time. And you need to figure out how to get customers to trust and be willing to take the risk. And the reward has to be bigger, right? And so I think that's those are three books that